The vast, spiraling structure of Xyloch's intergalactic academy loomed against the endless void of space, its silver towers glinting under the light of a nearby pulsar. The academy was a beacon of knowledge, a place where species from across the galaxy came together to study, train, and prove themselves. It was a place of prestige, of order, of careful calibration between minds and cultures. And now, for the first time in its long history, it had a human among its cadets. Jack Reynolds stepped off the shuttle with an easy gait, a stark contrast to the cautious, almost reverent steps of his fellow arrivals. Around him, cadets of all shapes and sizes observed him with wary curiosity. Towering reptilian cragtors, shimmering gelatinous forms of the Aurelians, multi-eyed cephalons with tentacles twitching in suspicion. The air was thick with silent judgment. Jack had expected this. Humanity's reputation in the wider galaxy was a strange one, barely known, dismissed by some, feared by others. To many, humans were fragile creatures, their soft, flesh-bound bodies ill-suited for the harsh realities of interstellar life. To others, they were unpredictable, reckless beings who barely understood their own limits. Neither view bothered Jack. If anything, he found the scrutiny amusing. A voice like shifting gravel snapped through the tension. You will form a line. You will follow all directives. You will not deviate. Professor Zhack was a towering Zentari, his emerald-hued scales rippling with irritation as he eyed the new recruits. His 4 eyes fixed on Jack for a fraction longer than necessary before he turned away. The message was clear. Humans were an anomaly, an experiment in inclusion, nothing more. Jack smirked but said nothing. They were led through the Academy's winding corridors, past laboratories filled with floating screens and war simulations, past massive training halls where gravity fluctuated with each step. The architecture was sleek, efficient, designed for function over comfort. Jack quickly noted the nervous glances from the cephalon beside him. The alien's pale blue skin pulsed faintly, an involuntary reaction to stress. "You okay there, bud?" Jack asked. The cephalon twitched, his 3 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "I am unaccustomed to proximity with species of such volatile physiology." Jack arched a brow. Volatile? The records indicate humans possess a primitive pain response, an inefficient circulatory system, and a tendency towards self-destructive behaviors. Jack let out a low whistle. "Wow, harsh." The cephalon hesitated, his tentacles curling inward. "I do not mean offense. I am Zel-Karin of the Cephalon Dominion. My people value knowledge above all else. I wish only to understand." Jack grinned. "Then you're in luck. I'm a walking case study in human resilience." Before Zel-Karin could respond, a thunderous impact rattled the corridor. A towering Kragda cadet had deliberately shouldered Jack aside, his chitinous plating making the hit feel like colliding with a steel beam. Jack caught his balance, but the message was clear. The Kragda turned, mandibles clicking in something that could have been amusement. "You are out of place, soft skin." His voice was deep layered, like the rumble of distant thunder. Jack met the alien's gaze with an easy grin. "And you must be Drilvar. Word is, Kragders don't respect weakness." So was that a greeting or a test? Drilvar narrowed his obsidian eyes. "Both." Jack rolled his shoulder and smirked. "Good, because I don't break easy." Drilvar studied him for a long moment before huffing a low growl and turning away. The tension lingered, but Jack felt something shift, perhaps not acceptance, but acknowledgement. The group finally reached the Academy's central atrium, where a massive screen displayed a holographic terrain, a simulated battlefield where future exercises would take place. Professor Zhack turned to face them. "This academy will test you beyond your limits," he announced. "Your bodies, your minds, and your willpower will be pushed to their breaking points. Some of you will fail. Some of you will fall." His gaze lingered once again on Jack. "And some of you will prove you were never meant to be here in the first place." Jack simply folded his arms, his smirk unwavering. Let them underestimate him. The final challenge of the simulation had arrived. The hum of the environment around them was charged with an oppressive stillness, as if the academy itself held its breath. Jack stood on the edge of a craggy plateau, his boots crunching against the alien terrain. His team was scattered, each member preparing for what they knew would be an intense trial of both physical endurance and strategic intellect. The test was designed to push them to their limits, but even so, nothing quite prepared them for what would happen next. A loud, mechanical screech tore through the still air, followed by the ominous whir of hovering drones. They emerged from the mist, their sleek, metallic bodies cutting through the atmosphere like birds of prey. Jack's body tensed instinctively, his hand going to the pulse rifle at his side, but he knew there was no point in resisting. There was no choice but to fight. As the drones descended, the team quickly fell into formation. Drilvar took a defensive stance, his powerful limbs poised to strike. Zelkarin's bioluminescent skin flickered in hues of anxious blue, but his eyes, large and intelligent, remained locked on the drones. Jack's gaze darted across the battlefield, scanning for weaknesses for a strategy. "Stay sharp," Jack muttered, moving quickly to the side, positioning himself to flank the drones. He was fast, he had to be. Their movements were calculated, but they relied on predictability. The key was to break their rhythm. It didn't take long for things to go awry. One of the drones fired its plasma cannon, the weapon sending a violent surge of energy across the field. Jack ducked instinctively, but the shot grazed his left arm, searing through the fabric of his combat suit and embedding a jagged burn into his skin. Pain flared instantly, the kind that seized his breath and made his vision blur at the edges. But Jack fought to stay focused. He stumbled but didn't fall. His mind was running on pure adrenaline. "Jack!" Zelkarin called, panic in his voice. But Jack didn't have time for reassurances. He was already moving, forcing himself to push past the pain. He glanced at his arm. Blood seeped through the fabric, and the wound was deep. But it wasn't the first time he'd been hurt in a fight, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The immediate danger was still the drones. He gritted his teeth and shoved the sensation aside. As Jack moved to rejoin the fray, Drilvar shouted a warning. The drones were regrouping, adapting to their tactics. It wouldn't be long before they had the upper hand. "Cover me," Jack barked, and without waiting for a response, he sprinted forward, ignoring the tremor in his legs and the blood that continued to drip from the wound. His body protested, but he pushed it to the limit, diving behind a rock outcropping for cover. His breath was ragged, his thoughts scattered, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not when his team needed him. He yanked the rifle from his side and took a deep breath, readying himself for the next wave. But then, something happened. A searing pain shot through his chest, a secondary hit from another plasma blast. This time, the impact sent him sprawling backward, his back slamming against the hard surface of the plateau. The shock of the blast ricocheted through his nervous system, and for a moment, everything went dark. Everything but the pain. Jack fought to stay conscious. The wound was deep. His vision swam as he gripped his chest, the edges of his breath shallow. This time, there was no ignoring it. His body was telling him something, and the message was loud and clear. Zelkarin's voice echoed in his ears, frantic, as if a distant part of his brain recognized it. "Jack, hold on. We're coming for you." But Jack didn't want to be dragged to safety. He didn't need their help. Not yet. Not when he could still fight. Pushing himself up onto his elbows, Jack ignored the feeling of dizziness clouding his mind. His breathing was labored, but still, he found the strength to pull himself back into the fray. "I'm fine," he managed to rasp, even as his body screamed in protest. His vision wavered, the edges darkening, but Jack was relentless. "I'm just a scratch." It was absurd, even to him. He was barely holding on, but his mind wouldn't let him stop. His hand clutched the rifle with a death grip, eyes trained on the remaining drones. They had not yet finished the job. Jack wasn't going to give them the chance. The sound of footsteps, the unmistakable weight, of Drilvar's massive form, suddenly loomed behind him. His comrade's voice was steady despite the chaos around them. "Get down, human. We'll handle this." But Jack waved him off weakly, his bloodied hand gesturing toward the drones. "No, we finish it. Now." With a ragged breath, Jack surged forward, legs shaking, vision flickering. The pain was an afterthought now. His body was numb, not from the absence of injury, but from his refusal to acknowledge the warning signals. His eyes locked on the drones, his fingers squeezing the trigger instinctively. Each shot landed with precision, dismantling their defenses one by one. It was chaos, gunfire, the sound of collapsing drones, the team shouting orders. Yet, through it all, Jack felt oddly detached. His body was failing him, but his will to fight was still intact. It was the part of him that kept pushing, even when reason told him to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last drone fell, its body collapsing into a heap of smoke and metal fragments. The plateau was silent once again, save for the heavy panting of Jack's team as they rushed to his side. Zelkarin crouched beside him, the concern clear in his voice. "Jack, you're bleeding out. We need to—" "I'm fine," Jack interrupted, though his voice was weak, strained. "It's just a scratch, remember?" But Zelkarin's worried gaze spoke volumes. Even Jack, deep in his denial, couldn't ignore the panic in his comrade's eyes. Drilvar let out a long, thoughtful rumble. "This human," he muttered, his tone oddly respectful. "He does not know when to quit." Jack let out a breath, the corners of his vision darkening once more. This time, he didn't push it away. He closed his eyes, knowing they were right. It was more than just a scratch. But that didn't matter. Not yet. The medical bay of Xylok's Intergalactic Academy was a sterile, humming space of softly glowing diagnostic screens and hovering medical drones. Jack sat on the examination table, his injured arm stretched out as a robotic limb stitched him up with practiced efficiency. The pain had dulled to a manageable throb, though he had to admit, he'd had worse. Across from him, Professor Hack observed in utter silence. His reptilian features remained unreadable, but Jack had come to recognize the slight flicker of his secondary eyelids as a sign of deep contemplation. "You are aware," Sack finally said, his voice measured, "that in most galactic species, an injury of the severity would be fatal." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? This?" He gestured at the fresh sutures. "It didn't even cut to the bone." Sack let out a low hiss, a sound Jack had come to associate with either disapproval or fascination. "Your circulatory system was compromised. Tissue was torn. Nerve endings were severed. Yet you continued functioning with minimal disruption." Jack smirked. "Yeah, well, humans are built to take a beating." From the corner of the room, Zelkarin let out a soft, uncertain trill. He had not moved from his spot since their arrival, his shifting bioluminescence betraying his unease. "I have consulted the Academy's biological records," he said. "Human resilience is anomalous." Jack chuckled. "I'm taking that as a compliment." Zelkarin's 3 eyes blinked in rapid succession. "It was not meant as one. Your pain tolerance defies conventional biological reasoning. How is it that you are not incapacitated by distress?" Jack leaned back, thoughtful. "I mean, pain sucks, don't get me wrong. But it's just pain. It's information. It tells us when something's wrong, sure, but it doesn't mean we stop moving." He flexed his fingers experimentally. The tightness in his muscles was already lessening. "If we stopped every time we got hurt, we wouldn't have made it this far as a species." Drilvar, who had been standing near the doorway with arms crossed, let out a slow, considering rumble. "Explain." Jack sighed, rubbing his good hand through his hair. "All right, look, back on Earth, our ancestors weren't exactly at the top of the food chain. No claws, no natural armor, just meat and bones, right?" He gestured at himself. "So we had to adapt. We had to be faster, smarter, and most importantly, we had to endure. Zack's gaze sharpened. Endure? Jack nodded. Yeah. See, most predators? They rely on bursts of speed. They chase, they kill, they eat. But humans? We figured out something different. We don't have to be the fastest. We just have to outlast everything else. He leaned forward, grinning. Ever hear of persistence hunting? Zelkarin hesitated. Explain. Jack spread his hands. Way back, before we had weapons, our ancestors used to hunt by running prey to death. We'd track an animal for hours, days even, keeping just enough distance to make it sprint. Again and again. Every time it stopped to rest, we'd show up, make it run again. Eventually, it collapsed from exhaustion, and we'd still be standing. Silence. Zelkarin's tendrils twitched, his coloration flickering between deep blue and startled white. Drilvar's mandibles parted slightly, as if he wanted to refute the claim, but could not find the words. Even Zack, ever composed, stared with an intensity that suggested Jack had just rewritten part of his understanding of biological hierarchy. Drilvar finally broke the silence. You chased your prey until it died. Jack shrugged. It worked. Zelkarin emitted a strangled, disbelieving sound. But that is not a sane strategy. Jack grinned. Says who? Zack made a slow, deliberate sound deep in his throat. This aligns with recorded human endurance capabilities. Reports from military conflicts indicate your species can operate under extreme duress for extended periods without succumbing to fatigue. Your metabolic structure, while inefficient in some aspects, is uniquely suited for sustained activity. Zelkarin shook his head. But pain. Your bodies suffer damage. Your nervous system must demand cessation. Jack exhaled through his nose. Sure, it demands it. But we don't always listen. He tapped his temple. Mind over matter. We push through because we have to. Zack studied him for a long moment. And this is why you dismissed your injury as just a scratch. Jack's smirk returned. What, that? If I stopped for every cut and bruise, I'd never get anything done. Zelkarin's bioluminescence dimmed to an unreadable gray. I do not understand your physiology. I am uncertain I wish to. Drilvar rumbled deep in his chest. It is inefficient. Jack shrugged. Maybe, but it keeps us alive. Zack turned to the hovering medical drone, which chirped its completion of Jack's treatment. Fascinating, the professor murmured. Perhaps humans are more than simply adaptable. Perhaps you are something else entirely. Jack flexed his fingers, testing the tightness of the bandages. He could feel the stares of his teammates, the lingering weight of their astonishment. The artificial sky of Xylok's Intergalactic Academy's survival zone darkened to an ominous crimson as the simulation entered its final phase. The test had begun with controlled skirmishes and environmental hazards, torrential acid rain, sudden gravitational shifts, pockets of extreme heat. But now, all safeguards had been removed. The objective was simple: survive. Jack stood at the edge of a jagged ravine, sweat dripping from his brow as he surveyed the shifting landscape. His muscles ached from the relentless pace of the exercise, but his mind remained sharp. Around him, his team, Zelkarin, Drilvar, and 2 additional cadets from the Cephalon Dominion and the Zenthri Empire, moved with tense efficiency. They had lasted longer than most. That was an accomplishment in itself. A deep, mechanical howl split the air. Jack turned sharply, eyes locking onto a distant ridge where massive quadrupedal constructs emerged from the mist. Their sleek metallic bodies gleamed under the simulated red sky, their glowing eyes scanning for movement. Predator-class drones. Zelkarin's tendrils curled in apprehension. Those units are designed for planetary extermination campaigns. Jack wiped blood from his split lip and grinned. So, they'll make this interesting. Drilvar exhaled a low growl, shifting into a defensive stance. We cannot defeat them outright. Our only chance is evasion. Before anyone could respond, the nearest drone lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, its heavy frame crushing the rock beneath it, plasma claws slicing through the air. Jack barely had time to shove Zelkarin aside before the ground exploded where they had been standing. Shards of molten stone peppered his exposed skin, but he barely registered the pain. Move now, think later. The team scattered. Jack sprinted along the ravine's edge, mind racing. The drones were tracking heat signatures. That meant they needed a distraction. He turned to the others. We need to split up. Force them to divide their attention. Zelkarin hesitated. But if we separate, survival probability goes up if we play it smart, Jack cut in. Trust me. Drillvar didn't argue. With a sharp nod, he veered left, drawing the attention of 2 drones. Zelkarin hesitated a moment longer before slithering into the shadows of a nearby outcrop. That left Jack with the largest of the constructs bearing down on him. Perfect. His lungs burned as he ran, weaving through crumbling terrain. The drone pursued, relentless. It wasn't going to stop. Jack's mind shifted gears, analyzing, adapting, improvising. He couldn't outfight this thing, but he could outlast it. A ridge loomed ahead, its slope steep but climbable. Jack dug in with everything he had, scrambling up the incline as the ground trembled beneath the weight of the pursuing machine. It leaped after him, claws digging into rock. It was fast, but Jack knew something it didn't. The instant he reached the top, he pushed off with every ounce of strength he had left, launching himself into the air. He twisted mid-fall, eyes locked onto his pursuer, right as it reached the edge. The drone's bulk was too great, its momentum unstoppable. It tipped forward. For a brief second, Jack saw its glowing eyes flicker in what almost seemed like realization. Then, with a metallic screech, it plummeted into the abyss below. Jack hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. His breath came in ragged gasps, pain radiating from a dozen scrapes and bruises. But he was alive. A shadow loomed over him. Drillvar stood at the ridge's edge, observing the fallen drone. His mandibles clicked in something close to respect. You baited it. Jack pushed himself up, wincing. Had to. Thing wasn't going to give up otherwise. Zelkarin emerged from the rocks, his coloration shifting between disbelief and relief. Your endurance borders on madness. Jack chuckled weakly. I hear that a lot. A sudden chime echoed across the landscape. The simulation dissolved, the battlefield vanishing in a shimmer of light. The cadets found themselves standing once more in the Academy's training chamber, alive, victorious, and exhausted. Professor Vshakis' voice resonated through the room, unreadable yet measured. Exercise complete. Jack exhaled, rolling his sore shoulders. He caught the lingering glances from his teammates. No longer just wary, but something else. Respect. Drillvar nodded once. Perhaps humans do belong here after all. Jack grinned. Told you.